Hello everyone! Welcome back to the afternoon, the upstairs track. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch and not too cold. So we have a great afternoon lined up for you. So up now is Elliot, who has actually written this talk twice because he accidentally deleted all of his slides and had to start again. So we can appreciate he's essentially written 2 talks for us now. He's going to deliver simultaneously at the same time. So yeah, please put a big hand together for Elliot and the Scandal.
Hey everyone, apologies for the clickbaity title. Some of you might be disappointed by the end of it, but I'll do my best to make it entertaining. I'm going to be talking about the post office scandal. The specific scandal I'll be talking about is the prosecution and convictions of postmasters due to accounting discrepancies attributing to fraud, which has been fought and won in many cases on the grounds that the system was not fit for purpose. So if that wasn't the scandal you were hoping to see, you've probably got time to go downstairs to the downstairs track. I'm Elliot Thurland. I work for BJSS. I've been there for nearly 10 years. And I'm passionate about testing local events in Leeds and York and have far too many hobbies to list. Throughout this presentation, please ask questions, jump in at any point, correct me if I've misspoken. The research is only as good as my skills, which aren't that high. And I want this to be as far away from a lecture as possible, so get involved. As most of my presentations do, they have a disclaimer. I haven't actually worked for the companies I'm talking about, so if I'm doing them a disservice, apologies if they're watching. And it's not an easy subject. It's impacted many lives throughout the 25 years. And obviously, yeah, it's been going on for a long time. So 25 years is a lifetime. I've tried to cut this down to a lunchtime menu. So there are 3 main parts: a starter, main, and dessert, if you will. A bit of history to start with, some lessons learnt, and a look into the future. I can't cram everything into a half-hour slot. But if you're interested in talking about it, come chat to me afterwards as well. So, the history starts in 1999 with a system now known as Horizon Legacy. Horizon was a system built for a specific purpose. Fujitsu are the company that created it for the customer. The customer was the post office. It actually started in 1995 to 1996, which was the start of the rollout. But even then, people were complaining about bugs as it was falsely reporting shortfalls of thousands of pounds. Now, for context, thousands of pounds, it sounds like a lot today. It was even more back then. Think about inflation or backwards deflation, whatever that word is. And yeah, thousands of pounds back then, you could buy houses for less than £100,000. So it was a lot of money to be accusing people of stealing. I've skipped quite a lot of history in 10 years, but the post office disagreed that the system was incorrect. And eventually, after all of that, a justice group was formed by people that wanted justice. They'd been accused that they'd done something wrong, and they didn't feel that they had. I'm sure we've all been there where we've been able to find a bug and not necessarily reproduce it consistently, and kind of scratching our head thinking, did I definitely find that? All of these users weren't satisfied. During those first 10 years, the reason people weren't satisfied is because people were prosecuted. Livelihoods were lost. Houses were remortgaged to pay the thousands of pounds of fines. And ultimately, in a few cases, lives were lost as well. And unfortunately, people were told that they were not the only ones. The justice group really formed to let people know that they weren't alone, that there were other people fighting and other people in the same situation. It's grown in size and over 500 in the current proceedings. Due to that group, we can jump forward to an independent investigation that happened. This was through local pressure, and the bit I really wanted to draw out is the forensic accounting that was undertaken. That money that was missing can tell a story, but it took a full year for all of that to come out. So imagine being given the job, like the worst bug hunt ever, to find out where all that money's gone. The other bit that was obviously complicated, and for anyone, is that it was highly limited. Almost everything was redacted. There was no obvious location of the missing finance, and it seems that the Post Office intentionally tried to hide or obfuscate all of the information that might have helped that. Most of the details were missing, so it made the investigation even harder. Jump into 2019, and you might think that that's the end of the story. There's a settlement. It happened nearly 20 years after it first appeared, but you'd be forgiven for thinking it's over. They admitted that they got it wrong in dealing with a number of postmasters. But the bit that kind of scratched my head is it took another 10 years from the conception of the justice group to them actually getting and winning their trial. And the cost of that trial was huge for these people, not just their livelihoods, not just money, but their reputations as well. And the Post Office did accept some of the blame. Most people in 2019 were just happy to have their names cleared. I've spoken to quite a few people. Even today, I've spoken to people that effectively were directly impacted by the scandal, either giving up their business or knowing someone in their village that was a criminal because the software was wrong. So, in 2024, embarrassingly, this is the bit where I started getting interested because there was an ITV dramatisation. Hopefully some of you in the audience may have watched that. Started on the 1st of January for 4 days. It's not the first time that anything has been aired. The BBC did a great panorama special in 2020 when I'm sure we were all busy doing more concerned with other things. But since January, there's been an absolute explosion of interest. And not only did I do a clickbait title, but I jumped on the bandwagon of people being interested about the scandal. The more you start delving into this, though, down this rabbit hole, the more it's clear that it wasn't just a bug. It was really much bigger than that. Something ultimately was really wrong. And hopefully, that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour into the history. There's some quick-fire facts I want to go over for anyone who hasn't seen it or doesn't know about the Post Office scandal. So yeah, if anyone would like to add anything now before I jump into those quick-fire facts, if you know anything about it or you've been affected, please.
Not been affected, but we dealt with the Post Office Bank with the fraud squad, because my granddad had been defrauded pre-Horizon, but the fraud office said, Bank of Thailand, and that's what they used to come in with, trying to get the checks, and they said photocopies of photocopies of photocopies of photocopies. We were just like a black square, and the police were like, we can't. So they swore about it and called the Bank of Thailand. So it's probably even before Horizon. It's an attitude of the rule, the leaders in that.
From everything that I've read, I can entirely believe you. So, quick fire facts. I should also say the motivation for this talk is wanting to see something like this never ever happen again, and hopefully everyone in the room can share that. So one of the things that was talked about in the dramatisation was the Post Office's ability to do prosecutions. So they prosecuted people that they thought were stealing money from them, basically. In actual fact, that isn't a right that the Post Office have that we don't have. Anyone in the UK, specifically England or Wales, has the ability to privately prosecute someone due to the Prosecution Offensive Act from 1985. So the Post Office didn't have any extra power to do what they did. The next one is probably the biggest eye-opening thing. It may give an indication as to why things have taken so long, but the Department of Business and Trade is owned by the government, and they are the sole shareholder of the Post Office. So it's quite similar to the NHS, if you like. The other interesting thing that I found during all of this was post offices are found everywhere. Pubs, cowsheds. In Scotland, they've got transit vans that drive around as a local service for people. Some in listed buildings. They are everywhere. And most importantly, they're rural. So over 50% of the 12,000 odd post offices are rural. So your first thought, thinking back to the 1990s, is how on earth does a rural location have the internet? My grandma's only just got internet in 2010. So back then, that was quite an achievement to actually get something working with that highly distributed system. It's actually quite impressive that they achieved it. It's also impressive that they did so badly on making it work properly. They did the difficult bit hard and the hard bit badly. And over 4,000 postmasters were actually accused of wrongdoing. Does anyone in the audience know how many actually went to jail? 700 were convicted and 236 went to jail. So imagine being a user of a piece of software where there's 12,000 offices and 200 people have been to jail because they're accused of doing wrong. Again, motivation, let's never let this happen again. So, did any of you watch the drama? Does everyone feel like they've had a bit of a whistle-stop tour into what I can cram into a very short amount of time of the actual post office bit? Cool. Has anyone heard anything else interesting about the post office? Any other scandals?
Well, in connection with this scandal, there's a bit of legislation. Someone else might be able to correct this. I think it's the Computing Act or something or other. And it sets the precedent that any records or forensic details generated by a computer program is, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, accepted as proof, as legal proof. And given that a scandal like this is definitely going to happen again, what if you could magic up a check or a balance? What would it be? What would it look like? What would count that? Would it be a responsibility to have that kind of forensic investigation still to test that assertion?
I'm going to come on to that a little bit. I don't answer it, but I pose that question as well, and I'm sure with the hot topics in everyone's minds, it's going to get even worse because forensically diagnosing stuff that might happen in a few years' time is even more difficult. I'll jump through the slides. But podcast highlights. So I cut this talk down. There was a podcast, the Daily Planet Normal podcast by the Daily Telegraph. 40-minute interview with an insider/whistleblower. And the most interesting bit for me was that was shared with me by a family member that had nothing to do with computing. They knew I was interested in the scandal since watching it. But for the first time in my life, my family actually kind of had an appreciation of what we do in testing. It seemed suddenly relatable, and they sent that over to me. And I listened to it, and there's some key highlights that I wanted to draw out of it. I'll share the link with anyone that wants to listen to this podcast. During the first release, there were war games. They knew there was going to be performance issues. It was because the pension date was falling close to Christmas Day. The solution was to turn off a policy. A data loss policy around Christmas and pension dates. You can't believe that happened, but it did, according to this whistleblower. Culture. I'm sure we've all seen elements of bad culture, but apparently the culture was extremely difficult to change. It had always been like this. Again, your bank comment. The processes, there were 100 to 250 page documents in order to find out how things worked on out-of-date technology, on technology that was old before it had even been started to be used for the product. And just after the release, the most demoralizing thing to be a tester, developer, anyone involved in this project, was that the feedback was that the system wasn't fit for purpose. After years of money and delays, it wasn't right. The other scary bit, the auditability of it. The defense has relied upon, the defense of the post office, postmasters, has relied on the fact that you could edit the system without a trace. Again, unbelievable that could happen even then, but that ultimately is what's caused all of this. The really, really fascinating bit to me was the work is funded. The whistleblower kept on making the point that in any other organizations, if you've got a manager that's managing people, they want to know what they're paying for. If you've got people paying for a company, they want to know what they're paying for. They suggest there is no way someone would have been paying for the amount of cover-up that was happening without knowing really what was going on behind the scenes, at least for a few levels. And actually, the other interesting bit, this system that they generated was the largest retail system, and it was processing over 20% of the UK's GDP because it was processing all of those pensions. So this was not a system that you wanted to take risks with, and yet we are where we are. So I sincerely hope that everyone here all cares about quality, and we don't ever want to see that happen again. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. But all of the research has led me to think that in retrospect, there were a lot of red flags, and some of these red flags still exist today. they're still prevalent in IT projects. Maybe not ones that we work with. Oh, Emily.
I was going to add, some postmasters were given training which they had to pass on to people that worked within the same branch as them. So only one person within a branch knows how to work the system the way they've been told to work the system. So that is another red flag for you.
Yeah, and many of these people, don't forget, were also not IT literate. So this was the first system that they'd ever learned to use. They hadn't used a Microsoft Word or an Excel or stuff that we take for granted today. The internet was just a concept that they wouldn't understand necessarily. I can't put them all in the same bag. I'm sure that some of them were as technologically able as we are. But yeah, this was a system that they were told would work and train other people on it, and it didn't. So auditability. The ability to undetectably change data, backdoors, processes that shouldn't be live. If you ever spot something like that, raise it, please, and fix it if you can. Cloud being the old buzzword before AI came along. Using the right tech to start with, to keep up to date, ensuring that quality starts with designs and proposals, and being forward-thinking and critiquing ideas if needed. You've got the quality triangle as well. Don't just squeeze the testing, push back, communicate openly, and use this tragic case as an example. Again, I've spoken to people in the audience today who have already started to use this scandal as an example of why we need to do the right thing. So all of you, if you take one thing away, use this as an example to justify the excellent work that you do. It was not intended to be the post office system as it was designed, as it ended up being towards the end. So it was actually intended to just process pensions. But we went from a system that processed pensions to being a system that did everything for the post office. If that's not scope creep, I don't know what is. And I know this one seems a bit like a cheat or a cop-out to get 5, but accessibility of the system, if you do watch the drama, if you actually look at the system, accessibility was awful. Usability was awful. People that were going to use it, many of whom had never used a computer, were in remote locations as well. So bear in mind connectivity issues, handling all of those errors. The system clearly was not fit for purpose. So this slide might seem like a massive tangent, but what they managed to achieve with the highly distributed system, as I've said, is actually quite impressive. But there has been a cost: reputation, financial, and ultimately lives. When I read the Phoenix Project for the first time, it to me seemed a little bit comical, the JFDI approach to everything. It was a novel. It sounded funny. It sounded like the worst case that you could imagine of all of my career. The post office scandal made me absolutely believe that this was a walk in the park compared to what the teams must have been feeling during when things were kicking off in the late 90s and early noughties. But clearly, between 1990, maybe in 2001, there was a bit of a thing that happened. But by now, we've solved a lot of these problems, right? We often do user-led research. We like collaborative working between smaller teams. We enjoy more lean processes and less management control of deadlines and promises. Obviously, the Agile Manifesto helped with that in 2001, but many companies are still on their journey from what the post office was to somewhere more like forward-thinking, as most of our companies will be today. So this one is not to say Agile is the solution. I don't think it necessarily is, but some of the concepts from it do help. So within the industry, we're already so much further forward, but hopefully we can continue to spread these best practices, and it's our responsibility to do so. And we can still obviously learn from all of this. It is our responsibility, and always has been our responsibility, to prevent things like this happening in the first place. But what about the rest of society? Psychology is changing. Everyone now has a phone. Everyone experiences bugs far more often than we probably all think is acceptable. But that terminology, all of those things that are now happening in courts, are much more accessible by the general public. So legally, for years, I personally think that this is going to be one of those landmark cases that's always cited in court proceedings, that you can't trust the computer. You can't just have a computer scientist. The judge had a computer scientist come along and testify that the system was fit for purpose. And because that computer scientist said yes, it is, that meant that the person who was up for trial was lying. Again, in these days you can't believe it, but back in the day, maybe it's slightly more palatable. And also, throughout all of this, Paul Patterson, the CEO of Fujitsu, in 2024, said that there was a huge list of bugs and documented defects, and yet none of that was presented to the jury when people were going through trial. Not until 2024 was this were these bug reports and defect lists mentioned. So, onto the dessert. What about the future? Is it bleak? Have I depressed everyone in the room? Yes and no. It's a horrible story, but to me it shows the absolute importance of testing, but also escalating issues to feel that you've done the right thing. It's scandalous to think that so few technologists involved in the system have actually come forwards, possibly due to legal documents that they signed and now fear. But it's good that people have come forwards and are starting to talk more openly about the things that were wrong at the time. But there will be more, as we've already heard. This is going to be probably the first that starts a bit of a wave of scandals coming out. I've spoken to colleagues that have told me, oh yes, definitely, I've heard of at least 5 scandals within X company that were due to come out at some point. I don't want my name to be anywhere near any of those, and I'm sure you don't. We also have continued to improve far faster than the legal system has managed to. Many of the things we talk about as concepts are things of the past. And while that's great, and it's important that we continue to develop our processes and avoid things like this recurring, we've improved, but the law, everything that it stands upon, has not yet caught up. We're still talking about a case that was first started 25 years later because we've been able to move on, do things differently, do things better. Other aspects, other industries can't move at that pace. And I still see far too often a lack of confidence in people raising issues. Hopefully this presentation will help at least one person raise something that they've been nagged by and prevent something like the PostOffice scandal happening again. I can't get away without mentioning AI. I'll leave it as an open question. I don't know the answer, but when AI comes into use, who's ultimately responsible? Is it you, the person who's using the AI? Is it the person who wrote the AI in the first place to do the thing? Forensic accounting or forensic figuring out where stuff went wrong. What happens when we're pointing the finger at AI to say it didn't do what we thought it was, but it was documented to not do that? It's quite scary. But I did want to finish before questions on a happy note to say, if you haven't already, please share this story with your family. It's the best example I've ever used to explain what I do, what people like me do, and the importance of what we as a collective do. And what I really want you to take away is you're already the proactive ones. You're here today pushing testing and QA to the limits. And we share a passion for that. And I thank you for being part of the positive change. Colin.
So, yeah, the thing that you mentioned about the computer scientists being asked to be an and stuff like that, kind of, I guess, ties into something that I was thinking about when people call themselves software engineers and what that actually means. Because if you're a civil engineer, you have to be accredited and you have to kind of do things within a professional body and stuff like that. We don't really have that. So, like, would this potentially kind of cause some of those knock-on effects where people might have to do that?
It's a conversation that I've had at the pub quite a few times where if we ever became a regulated industry, I think a lot of the fun would be taken away from a lot of people, and you'd end up with processes that we already have, like frameworks. Prince2, good example, where people have to conform to a certain way of doing things for the greater good, but that takes for me, it takes a lot of the joy of creativity out of things. So in one sense, I pray that we never become a regulated industry, but in another sense, the quality side of me thinks, is it so bad? And only time will tell. But it is shocking that no one, they're regulating the use of the internet, but they're not regulating how you develop software that specifically could damage lives and ultimately lead to pretty bad outcomes.
And then a follow-up, it's more a statement, but I'm so glad that you clarified something happened in 2001 was the Agile Manifesto,
Yeah.
like 9/11, because that's what went right.
Yeah, okay. Yes, yeah, I did mean the Agile Manifesto, which again was, you can't critique the way that they did things for, the Agile Manifesto wasn't even written down. I'm sure people were figuring it out at that point, but you can't say, you should have just done it in an agile way. That wasn't the practice. But to some extent, at some point, a big project like this was going to give, and it's nice to be living in the world where those ways of working are quite a bit of the past.
Anyway, it's not like that would spread massively wider.
It still hasn't, right?
Some would know it's written a really big book that they send to all their clients to read.
Yes, yeah, no one does that. Lee.
Just out of curiosity, on just being off the back of that and becoming regulated industry all the time, how many people in this room actually have any formal education in testing or quality or software engineering?
I think you added or software engineering at the end and captured a few more people.
I was just wondering, because I know most testers don't come into it via any formal kind of pathways, and the support for their testing pipelines is pretty damn strong. So, what about half of us haven't? That'd be half of us who wouldn't be able to work in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, the point I was making before is I have an art degree, so I'd be completely out of the straw anyway.
Yeah, I don't like that idea.
No, I don't. I just know that there's, when things get to certain levels within certain places, you end up thinking, well, the obvious solution is this. And I think we need to probably do better within the industry to make sure that we're without that regulation, we're still, clearly, this is one thing that's happened in many years, but we still need to be actively trying to stop these things happening because no one else is going to, right? Oh, sorry.
When do you think this scandal will end?
I think it's going to go on probably another 10 years. A complete guess, but there's more. Given how long the timelines have been, given that this is only the start, and the government ultimately will have to start to answer for some of this, probably, I expect it will go on for at least another decade because, again, they couldn't have not known about this. They're the sole shareholder. Someone will have wanted to know at some point. There'll be email trails. Ultimately, the most important thing is the end user, right? And those people that were affected the most, you just want them to be able to get on with their lives and then let society heal itself within government. But I don't think that'll happen quickly.
The truth's really only coming out because the inquiry, now the inquiry, I suppose it would probably still be there.
Oh yeah. I mean, the fact it's 2024 and only just now are we hearing about bug reports that were definitely there and publishable but were kept hidden.
Well, they actually shredded some.
Oh yeah, and they hid records of people that have visited places to do on-site analysis. So yeah, some of it will never be recoverable.
Seems like a lot of people need to take accountability, really.
Yeah, if anyone knows someone that was there, give them a nudge. Yeah, I think I'm going to be out of time, but thank you so much for your questions.